During my high school years, I had this incredible privilege to listen to a very famous philosopher. His name is Nitya Chaitanya Yadi. It wouldn't mean anything to you, but if you lived in India in the 1980s and 1990s, he was like a rock star philosopher going around and speaking in sold-out stadiums. And at that time, I was not a Christian. I was not particularly religious, but I was very interested in religious philosophy, particularly the Eastern religions. I was fascinated by the Hindu philosophy. I'll go and listen to these lectures. Even though I was kind of high schooler, intellectual capacity was still not developed. But I remember going to this sold-out big auditorium. Nitya Chaitanya Yadi stands up to speak. You know, he's a sage, like one of these yogi kind of clothes, like you probably can picture from what you know in media. And he stands up. Somebody introduced him. Nitya Chaitanya Yadi comes to the stage, and he just his eyes kind of scan the audience first. And he looks at these pictures of Hindu gods posted all around the wall. And it is not very uncommon. You go to any auditorium in India, they will have the pictures of different gods. It's almost like a pantheon of different gods. And right in the middle of this, there is also a picture of Jesus. And again, it is not very uncommon for Hindus to consider Jesus as one of their many gods and put him in their shrine. Again, nothing special. So before he started the lecture, sort of a casual conversation, he said, "It is very interesting that the Christian God, as opposed to our gods, which is the Hindu gods," he said, "whenever I look at the Christian God, I can see the sorrows of the whole world in his eyes." I remember hearing that even now. He said, when I look at the picture of the Christian God, I can see the sorrows of the whole world in his eyes. Now, obviously, we know that what we see in the picture was not real Jesus. It is somebody's depiction of what Jesus might have looked like. But the reality is that growing up in India or elsewhere, I have never seen a smiling picture of Jesus. Because Jesus is always portrayed with a sense of melancholy in his face. That's the depiction of Jesus. Until recently, now we have the movie Chosen. You have a different perception of Jesus, but again, Chosen is more like the American Jesus with an accent, okay? I know there are a lot of Chosen fans. I like that series too, but don't think that that's real Jesus. But the point, again, we don't really know what the real Jesus looked like, but there was something interesting. Because Hindu gods are portrayed often smiling and shouting and laughing like this. And this Hindu philosopher recognizes, looking at the pantheon, and right in the middle of a God who's serious, or there is something that the weight of the world, the sorrow of the world is in his eyes. And he said, that is something very fascinating about the Christian God. And that point is when my spiritual journey began. That is that one thing that got me curious about this Jesus, even though I was born in a nominal Christian family, didn't care anything about Christianity. I thought it was like a white man's religion. That's the way that we were taught. But there was something. That's the moment. It was not Billy Graham. It was not Joel Osteen. It is this Hindu philosopher saying that there is something intriguing about this Christian God. I thought, wow, that is interesting. I need to explore that. And if you know Bollywood movies, Bollywood, by the way, is symbolic of what we call Indian movies, Hollywood, Bollywood. Bollywood is actually 3 times the size of Hollywood. We make 1,200 movies every year. So it's a big industry. But if you watch Bollywood, most of the heroes of Bollywood are Hindus or Muslims. They are the kind of majority religions. Christians are insignificant. There might be some side characters, but heroes and heroines are either Hindus or Muslims. And it's very common in Bollywood movies, the heroes pray to their God, and sometimes God intervene. Their gods intervene and do miracles and all that kind of stuff. It's very common in Bollywood or Indian movies. But something that fascinated me, that in most of this movie, I'll say almost always, even though the hero is a Muslim or a Hindu, whenever they go through an experience of pain and suffering and angst, they always go to a church. They don't go to a temple. They don't go to a mosque. Camera goes into this church, a Gothic cathedral kind of thing, and then the hero, who's a Muslim or a Hindu, sits there and meditate, contemplate. Quite often they show the crucifix and this dying God in front of them. And because that adds to the emotional intensity of the scene. See, there is something unique about the Christian God. And they know that He is the only God who can understand and even identify with the pain and the suffering of humanity. And we call Him a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German theologian who was executed by Nazis at age 39, said this. This is a letter he wrote while he was in prison waiting to be executed. This is what he wrote to his friend about Jesus. He is weak and powerless in the world. And that is precisely the way, the only way, in which He is with us and helps us. Only the suffering God can help. Only the suffering God can help. Now that is radically different from the understanding of what religion itself is. Because nobody associates God with suffering. We associate God with victory, triumph, joy, not with suffering. Even the Greek notion of God, from which the Christian philosophy in some way originated, there are two characteristics of God, two Greek words. One is apatheia, and the other one is autarkia. Apatheia means impassibility. The word apathy, you know what apathy means, right? Which means you're distant from the emotional turmoil that's happening around you. Apathetic. So apatheia means impassible. God is impassible means God is not affected by the pain and suffering or anything that's happening in the world. The second is autarkia, which means self-sufficiency. Which means God doesn't need your help. God doesn't depend on you. His joy doesn't come from you because He is self-sufficient. That is the understanding of God in any and every religion, including the American Christian religion, I would say. But Jesus was very different. We see in the Bible the God not impassible, not just impassible or self-sufficient. Here is a God of pathos, God of passion. God came in human flesh in Jesus, and He was upset. He was angry. He even cried. What kind of a God is this? How can God suffer? How can God suffer? The answer is very simple. God can and God will suffer because God is love. This is a series of 4 sessions we are doing on the suffering God. in a suffering world. So you need to listen to all the 4 to understand this picture. So if you haven't listened to the last 2 sermons, make sure that you listen to and also listen to the next one before you write down your questions. In the first week, we said God is love, and love necessitates free will, and free will causes suffering, right? That was the first week. And the second week, we saw that was the explanation for what we call moral evil. And last week, we looked at natural evil, where we saw the God of the world, that God with small g, is a different God, and we talked about the battle between the capital G God and small g God. I'm not going to explain all of this. So you have moral evil, you have natural evil. Right in the middle, you find God in suffering, God in pain. God in pain in the middle because of the God's impossibilities. There are 3 kinds of impossibilities. There are logical impossibility, there are moral impossibility, there are relational impossibility. Because God is omnipotent doesn't mean that God can do everything. God is omnipotent means God can do whatever He wills. That's different. That's different, right? And you see God in pain because God is love, and love causes suffering. Woody Allen, the filmmaker, said this: to love is to suffer. To avoid suffering, one must not love. But then one suffers from not loving. That is the predicament. That is the paradox, isn't it? That's why we call love hurts, right? Isn't that what we call love hurts? The moment you choose to love someone, whether you are God or the devil, you are choosing to suffer. It doesn't matter who you are. The moment you choose to love someone, you are choosing to suffer. Suffering will follow love. That is the way the world works. So God is in pain. There is a very famous Japanese theologian, Kazuo Kitamori. He said he wrote a book about the pain of God. It's an amazing exploration. It's fascinated me. I think it was in the 40s or 50s. There is a quote from Kazuo Kitamori. He said, God experiences pain because He loves the object of His wrath. Did you get that? See, that's why we call God the Father. You know, Christianity is the only religion which addresses God as the Father. Because the moment you introduce Father, the predicament a father goes through is involved in that word too. Because any father in this room, or mothers too, go through this because you have these children who disobeys you. And they causes you wrath. But the problem is that if it was a neighbor's kid, then you could have wrath. But this is you love the object of your wrath. That causes the internal pain. This is what the pain of God. And the pain of God is manifested in its entirety in the cross of Christ. You see God in pain. In pain. Crucifixion. The best possible human being who lived on the planet is going through the worst possible tragedy ever imagined. If you are a storyteller, you cannot transcend that arc, because you cannot find anyone better than Jesus in this world, and you cannot find any tragedy worse than crucifixion, especially in that context in this world. And here is a story that brings them both. That's the pain of God. And God Himself dying on the cross. See, George MacDonald, and I did a series called The Quest last year. So you can go back, and it's all YouTube. You can go back and listen to this mystery that we can never explain. How does God die? And how can God be human and divine at the same time? I have handled this before, available on YouTube. The intellectual part of that hopefully will take care of this. But here is one thing I didn't mention. Here's a quote from Scottish theologian George MacDonald. This is what he said in the context of suffering. He said, "The Son of God suffered unto death, not that men might not suffer, but that their suffering might be like his." This is a loaded word. I want you to listen to this carefully. Let me rephrase this. What he's trying to say is, Jesus did not die to take away our suffering, but he died so that in our suffering, we will become more like him. Does that make sense? We talk about we want to be like Christ. We want to be formed in the image of Christ. Whenever we talk about, we have this understanding of the Western notion of Jesus, who is a triumphant hero, like a Superman, wearing in his underwear over the pants and flying in and help. That's what we say. I want to be like Jesus. No, the image of Christ is on the cross, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. The more you suffer, the more you become like God. That's the twist of Christianity. I'll say it is like the devil's weapon turned against him. Back in the days when I used to, I can remember some of the superhero, supervillain movies. The supervillain will have a death laser. He's going to shoot the superhero with this death laser. If it touches you, you're dead. So superhero will have a mirror. Superhero will have a mirror and will hold it like this. The supervillain shoot and the mirror reflected back and the villain gets, affected by that, right? Villain gets destroyed by that, right? The point I'm trying to make is that's what George MacDonald says. The enemy causes suffering so that each time we suffer, we curse God. We say, how can God make this happen? Right? That happens to us. How can God do this? The more suffering you have, the more distant from God you feel in a traditional understanding of God. But when God himself is suffering, the more you suffer, the more you are getting closer to God. Suffering in Christianity, only in Christianity, does not cause alienation, but communion with God. The more enemy pushes you, the more suffering he inflicts on you, the more you become like God. My goodness. What a clever theology. It's fascinating. See, even on the cross, Jesus said, my God, why have you forsaken me? Can you picture that? We thought Jesus was God. And God himself says, my God, why have you forsaken me? See, each time suffering comes to us, we feel distant from others. We feel distant from God. And that is the worst kind of suffering. The whole theology of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, revolve around the concept of God-forsakenness. That is the ultimate pain. When we feel we are forsaken by God, that is the ultimate suffering. That is the ultimate pain that we feel because we are forsaken by God. Here on the cross, God himself experiences God-forsakenness. God himself. This is the paradoxical juxtaposition of the humanity and divinity of a man. Again, go back to Quest. And I have explained some of the intellectual aspect of humanity and divinity coming together in one person. All I want you to take away today is that God himself has experienced God-forsakenness. So whenever you are suffering, you are not suffering alone. I don't care what kind of suffering you go through, but you're not suffering alone. Now that is the beauty of Christianity. I have had the privilege to talk to people who are going through suffering. That's the job of a pastor. I myself would say, compared to many things that happen in the world, I haven't really suffered anything compared to many other people go through. We have all our crosses and we have all our suffering. But what I have experienced is that people who struggle with the question of theodicy, Like, how can a good God allow this to happen? Why didn't God do anything to stop it? Most of these people who ask this kind of questions, the intellectual question, the cerebral questions, are people like me, who never really had a lot of suffering, PhDs, and we wanted to wonder about this. It's an important question. It's a genuine question. But people who are actually going through suffering, you know what they want? They want somebody who understands their pain, somebody who have gone through their pain, somebody who experiences their pain. That is the Christian God. The Christian God is the suffering hero. The suffering hero. See, I'll come to a close with this story. I remember when, again, growing up in India, my house was near a big church. We had around 2,000 families in an Orthodox church, a lot of people, and there was a cemetery close by. And there will always be some funeral happening in the cemetery. And as a kid, I will go and watch these funerals. I know I had a morbid fascination about some of these things, right? I remember watching a particular funeral. And in India, when funeral happens, people are very expressive. They weep and wail, they cry. It's not like what you see here. This particular day, the only son of a lady died suddenly in a bike accident or something like that. And she was inconsolable. And she was a single mother. She didn't have anybody in the world except her son, who was 18 or 19. And he died unexpectedly. And the funeral was happening. And this lady, my goodness, she was wailing, and she was like a pinching on her hair, and he was clinging on to this coffin. She won't let them bury the kid. And the whole place came to a standstill. The priest didn't know what to do, and because he's screaming like loud, everybody in the whole neighborhood can hear the way she screams, and nobody knew what to do. And the whole funeral thing came to a halt, and people don't know what to do. She's not going to let that coffin go. And then there was, that went on for a few minutes. Then I saw a lady walking from the crowd, an ordinary looking woman, just like this mother, came and stood next to this mother who was crying. Some kind of miracle happened. The lady stopped crying, pin drop silence. The mother leaned onto the shoulder of this other woman who just walked up to her. And they just sat there quiet. And the funeral continued, and the whole thing went without any disruption. And I wondered, what in the world did just happen? And then later I realized that this woman who walked to the mother also had a son, and who died in a very similar accident a year ago. And when that woman came and sat next to the mother, she didn't need any explanation. She didn't have to ask any theodicy question. All a suffering person needs is somebody who is with them in their suffering, so that they know they are not alone. See, that is the beauty of Christianity. Christianity's answer to a suffering world is a suffering God. I'll say that one more time. Christianity's answer to a suffering world is a suffering God who says that I'm going to come and be with you. That is the mystery of the cross. Each time you go through suffering, you are not going away from God. You are coming a step closer to God, because God himself suffered. God is the man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. That is the call Jesus is placing on us, to be suffering heroes in our neighborhood. Suffering heroes. See, Christian activism has taken such a bad turn in this country in the last few years. Whenever we talk about Christian activism, we always think about going with the placards and going with the, no silence, violence, whatever we call it, no justice, no peace. And the Christians also got into the social justice gamut of things. But there are two sides to activism. There are two sides. One is, there are two ways of doing Christian activism. One is this. Don't just stand there, do something. That's the usual form of activism we know. And the other one is don't just do something, stand there. Sometimes you need to stand there just doing nothing. Not tweeting, not Facebooking, not social media and showing the whole world how virtuous you are. But instead of that, standing there, just stand there. Just don't talk like this woman. I don't know who the other woman was. She doesn't have a PhD. She was not a priest. I don't know even the other lady was a Christian. But she did a ministry nobody could do. And nobody know her name. Nobody, it doesn't matter. But now that is Christian activism. That is a suffering hero who suffers with those who suffer in this world. And that is the mystery we are coming to. I'm going to do this communion a different way today. Okay? And we always take part from the communion. And this is one table we share, which is beautiful. But today, I want to use this as a call for you to go out into the community and become suffering heroes. I want Lake Avenue Church to be suffering heroes. There is no way we can eliminate the suffering in the world. Yes, Samaritan Spurs helped. Yes, many other organizations help. Yes, we can all do something to help. But at the end of the day, we are not going to eliminate suffering in this world. But one thing we can do is that we can make sure nobody suffers alone. Nobody suffers alone. That's my call to Lake Avenue Church. I want you to be the suffering heroes. I want the Hindu philosophers to look at you and say, there is something different about these Christians. There is something different about these Christians because they carry the sorrows of the world in their eyes, in their heart. Now that is the real communion, where God himself came to this world, experienced God-forsakenness, the ultimate pain we can go through, and say that you are not alone. Each time you suffer, you are suffering with me. You are consistently becoming transformed into the image of Christ. That is why the night Jesus was betrayed, he took bread and broke it as a metaphor of his own body being broken. The pain of God. The pain of God. That's what he demonstrated on the communion. And in the same way, he took the cup and said, this is the New Testament in my blood. I'm not here to establish the law, use my authority. I'm not here to change systems and policies, but I'm here to establish a covenant with you, and I'm going to use my blood. And that's the beauty of this communion. A suffering God, instead of watching us from the distance, comes to the world and chooses to suffer with us and to deploy us to our neighborhood, to be suffering heroes, to suffer with other people. Don't just do something, stand there for people and stand in their pain. Can you stand for the reading of the word? Isaiah chapter 53. It's a chapter which was written almost 750 years before Jesus was on the cross. But Isaiah got such a clear vision of the cross that even the Gospels couldn't capture that vision of the suffering hero. I'm going to read from the scripture of the man of sorrows acquainted with grief. Then I'm going to end the service. But the communion servers can come up right now, actually. But I'm going to officially end the service. And I want you to come, as usual, exit to left, come straight, receive the communion. Now, the next part is different. You can either go back to your seat and have it by yourself or with a small group you choose to. If you want to take it outside, that's fine too. If you want to take it home, that's fine too. Because this time we are going to use this as a symbol of us becoming the suffering heroes outside. It is much easier and costlier to come here and have communion, sit together and eat, which is fantastic. That's a communion aspect. But now, I want this Sunday to be different. I want you to go and take the communion at your pace, where you choose to. If you want to choose it to eat here, that's fine too. But the service will end once I finish reading the scripture. Okay? So the communion will be the benediction this Sunday. This Sunday only. Don't panic. Just for this Sunday. Because it's a calling to be a suffering hero. Isaiah chapter 53. I'm going to read from verse 3 to 5. He was despised and forsaken of men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. And like one from whom men hide their face, he was despised, and we did not esteem him. Surely our griefs he himself bore, and our sorrows he carried. Yet we ourselves esteemed him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was pierced through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastening of our well-being fell upon him, and by his scourging we are healed. Come, take communion, and as you go out, there will be benevolence offering at the exit. That is a special offering we give to the community. This is all being part of the suffering heroes. God bless you as you leave.